It's great to see all of you. Thank you so much for coming today to listen to us as your representatives and your candidates for public office. My name is Keam. I have the honor of representing where you are sitting right here, the 35th District in the House of Delegates. This is my 4th term, 8th year in serving, and I am completely and truly honored and privileged to have this job to represent my neighbors. And I see many of my constituents here, from folks from the Vienna and Oakton area, as well as from Tysons and Dunmurray. And I'm also excited to see young people here like Bailey and Claire and others from high school who are also participating in the civic exercise. The reason why this election this November, 40 days or 39 days from now, is so important is because you're electing the leaders that represent you at the most important parts of your lives. Not like the federal government. We don't deal with war and peace. We don't deal with big issues that you can't put your arms around. What we as your state representatives do is deal with issues that you deal with every single day. Traffic, the quality of your schools, the quality of the environment that you live in, as well as infrastructure and health care for all those people that need it. So our job is to represent you in your day-to-day lives in the way that the government should be meaningful to you and not get in your way, not become obstacles so that you can't achieve your dreams. So I look forward to working with you, answering your questions, and also to share whatever thoughts we can to make this a better Commonwealth and better Fairfax County for all of us. Thank you so much.
Mr. Bulova.
Mark. All right, I'm David Bulova. I represent the 37th District in the Virginia House of Delegates. That's the city of Fairfax and parts of Fairfax County stretching out to the west. And it's been an honor to be able to represent my constituents since 2005. And I want to thank the League of Women Voters and all the organizers for having this wonderful event. I grew up here in Fairfax County, raising my 3 kids here, and I want to make sure that they enjoy the same quality of life, if not better, than I had. And so my focus in the General Assembly has really been on those quality of life issues. There's a couple of things that really guide me with respect to the General Assembly. I strongly believe that we have to have a strong multimodal transportation system in order for our economy to thrive. It's one of the reasons I was very passionate for the 2013 transportation plan that's putting billions of dollars into our infrastructure. I believe strongly that our environment and our economy are linked. And so I'm just as proud of the fact that I have a 100% rating for the League of Conservation Voters as I am that I was recognized by the Virginia Chamber of Commerce on my work on career and technical education, which leads me to the last thing, which is education. There's no greater thing to invest in than education, and have worked behind the scenes on the Standards of the Learning Innovation Commission. We got a lot of work to do in Virginia. I'm really excited about the prospect of being reelected in 2018 for that session. It includes expanding health care in Virginia, dealing with identity theft and making sure we close some of those loopholes, and then also pushing forward nonpartisan redistricting reform. So I'm looking forward to your questions and a great evening.
Thank you, Mr. Bulova. Ms. Tran.
Good evening. I'm really glad to be with you here. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for organizing this really important conversation. My name is Kathy Tran, and I'm running for the Virginia House of Delegates to represent the 42nd District. The 42nd District is located entirely within Fairfax County and covers parts of Mount Vernon, Lorton, Springfield, and Fairfax Station. I came to this country as a refugee when I was almost 2 years old from Vietnam. At the end of that war, my parents were determined to raise their family in a country that offered hope, opportunity, and freedom. And I'm running in this race today to make sure that we're safeguarding these values. I'm a mom of 4 and the president of my PTA, and making sure that the state invests in a world-class public school system is one of my top priorities. I've also dedicated my entire career working to make sure that all Americans have the skills they need to succeed in their own careers. So I want to make sure that we're growing an economy by investing in the people. And I want to take my expertise of helping workers, including veterans and military spouses, to Richmond, and making sure that all Virginians have the skills they need to thrive and reach their full career potential. And lastly, I want to make sure that we're safeguarding our most sacred rights, access to high quality, affordable health care, and protecting women's access to critical reproductive health services, as well as making sure that we're a welcoming and inclusive Virginia for everybody. So I look forward to tonight's conversation, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Buenas noches, good night, marhaba, sharafna, año haseyo. I am Dr. Lolita Mancheno-Smoak, and did you know that 80 cents of every dollar you send down to Richmond goes elsewhere in Virginia and not to us? We're Virginia's ATM, and we need to focus and make sure that we change that. One of the things that I'm looking at is ensuring that I focus on growing the economy, lowering our taxes, improving our infrastructure, and ensuring that we have quality education for all. In order to do this, there needs to be a focus on us growing geographically our economy. And for a state that has riches in human resources, in natural resources, and a strong infrastructure and ports, we need to incentivize our economy and investments in our economy so we can in turn ensure that we address all the issues and concerns of our community. As a resident of Virginia for 21 years and of South County, I commit to you to earn your trust, to work hard to be worthy of your vote this November.
Mr. Marcus Simon.
Good evening. My name is Delegate Marcus Simon. I represent the 53rd District, which is Falls Church, Merrifield, all the way out here, almost to this spot, stops at the Mosaic District in Nutley Street. I've been in the General Assembly for 4 sessions now. My original campaign promise or campaign slogan was working harder, working together. And I'd like to think that I've accomplished a lot of that during my first 2 sessions. We only meet for 45 and 60 days each year, but during that time, each session, we'll consider about 3,000 pieces of legislation. Starting in the 2014 session, I've co-patroned 622 bills, 422 of which actually passed both the House and the Senate. So I've been active down there. When I first got there in 2014, I had sort of a big idea for a freshman, which was to make it illegal to publish images of someone in an embarrassing situation that you may have obtained during a relationship once that relationship was over. And we call that revenge porn. I actually partnered with the very senior Republican chairman of the House Criminal Law Subcommittee. I was his only Democratic co-patron of that bill, and we got it passed together, and it passed both houses and was signed into law. Thank you. You feel free to applaud. I'll take more.
You're a Dave. I'll on that.
So, 2016, I had Republican co-patrons in my fair housing bill. We had more than ever. And I even, with the House Majority Whip, co-patroned a bill to make Virginia the first state in the country to regulate daily fantasy sports. So we're outnumbered by quite a bit. A lot of things get very contentious down there, but when we work hard at it, we can work together to get things done. I'll have more to say. I look forward to your questions.
You could come to the podium if you prefer that.
Oh, I'll just take my
Let's
Sorry.
Where's my notes? All right, so I wanted to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this event and everybody for showing up here today. My name is Mike Casey. I'm an engineer. I was born and raised and educated in Fairfax County and then at Virginia Tech. And when I go campaigning, when I go knocking on doors or shaking hands with the Metro, I don't target likely supporters. I'm looking for an honest conversation about politics with anyone who's willing. And one of the effects of that is that I talk to a lot of people who don't vote. And about half of all eligible Americans don't vote. And what I'm hearing isn't that voting is too difficult, nor that they don't care. There's a mentality that the government is working in the interest of the parties and the people who finance campaigns. What does my voice really count for when I'm talking about climate change or electricity prices when Dominion is funding just about every campaign in the state? So they feel like the system is never going to work for them, so they may as well stay home. And I don't agree with that conclusion, but those are legitimate concerns, and we can help address those with some election reforms, with campaign finance restrictions, with nonpartisan districting, and with ranked choice voting. So I'm focused on that, on fixing our healthcare system to make sure that everybody has a basic level of healthcare, and on building a transportation network that's backed by mass transit. I look forward to this discussion tonight. Thank you all for coming again.
Thank you so much. You're working for us.
Generously giving me your seat.
I always wanted to be the Speaker of the House, but
Yes. We have here today Ms. Lee Nussbaum, who is a representative of Ms. Eileen Philliphorn, and she'll make a statement on her behalf. Yeah.
Stand wherever's easiest. I'll stand in between these two. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Lee Nussbaum. I work for Delegate Philliphorn, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of my boss, who represents the 41st District in the House of Delegates, which includes Burke, Springfield, and parts of Springfield, Fairfax, and Fairfax Station. And Delegate Philliphorn wanted me to make sure that you all knew how sorry she is that she couldn't make it here tonight. And just on a brief personal note, it's very neat to be here addressing you all because my grandmother used to be the president of the Norfolk chapter of the League of Women Voters. But Delegate Philliphorn has served in the House for 7 years after winning a special election in 2010. She currently serves on the Commerce and Labor, Finance and Transportation Committees and serves as Vice Chair for Outreach of the House Democratic Caucus. And since her first election, she's introduced and passed over 25 pieces of legislation under her name and had her legislation incorporated into many more important landmark laws, whether advocating for people with disabilities, combating sexual assault, increasing child care protections, cutting red tape for small businesses, improving our roads, protecting our schools, or encouraging innovation. Delegate Philliphorn has been at the forefront of all of these issues. Just this past session, she passed legislation that allows women to purchase a year's supply of birth control at one time, a law that ensures that parents are properly notified about bullying incidents, and legislation that teaches high school students about the law and meaning of consent. Delegate Philliphorn considers herself fortunate to have the League's support during the 2017 session for several bills, including one that would allow citizens who are naturalized after a voter registration deadline to be able to register to vote, as well as a gun safety bill. Delegate Philliphorn focuses on common sense solutions to make a difference in the lives of all Virginians, and her specific legislative achievements are further detailed in the literature in the back of the room. And if you live in the 41st District, I hope she'll have your vote on November 7th.
So we'll start with the questions. And our first question is for you, Mr. Keam. Actually, it's for everybody, but he'll start. What are your top 3 priorities for the 2018 session of the General Assembly? You have 1 minute.
Sure. Thank you very much, Anu, for the question and for your volunteering today, as well as our members from League of Women Voters and other organizations. My 3 priorities now have been similar, if not identical, to my priorities for the last 8 years, which is the 3 issues that I hear the most when I'm knocking on doors talking to my voters in this area. First is the traffic and the transportation mess that we have here, and the congestion. The good news is we have a lot of people coming here because of the jobs and the strong economy. The bad news is they all want to live in the same places that we all already live in. And so to the extent that we have a lot of traffic, we want to make sure we have congestion relief. One of those possibilities, of course, is the metro extending all the way to the Dulles Airport. We want to make sure that we find a dedicated source of funding so that the metro is not held hostage by Maryland and DC. The other 2 issues that are most important to my constituents as well as me as a family man is education of our school system and our kids. I have 2 kids in James Madison High School. We want to make sure that our teachers are treated the same way as all the other professionals are, and they're paid well, and they're treated with respect. And so education is something my friend David Bulova and I work on. And the third point real quickly is the economy, and we'll talk more about that later. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Bulova.
Thank you very much. And it's always hard to nail it down to your top 3 priorities. And so as a politician, you try to squeeze in a couple others in there. But really up at the top, economic diversification. We still have sequestration that's floating out there. And so it's really important that Virginia get ahead of that and continue to diversify our economy. K through 12 education, this is going to be a big year. Number one, we're continuing to progress along with SOL reform and also high school graduation reform. I think we've got some exciting things happening out there. We need to make sure that those continue. This is also an extraordinarily important year for education resources. So this is a re-benchmarking year. And so this is the year where we need to make sure that the General Assembly is paying our fair share of the standards of quality across the board. There's 2 others that I'm really going to be focused on. One is data breach notification and what to do if a company loses your information and makes it out there so that people can steal it. I was proud to be part of putting together Virginia's laws 10 years ago. Those need to be updated. And then college affordability is another really big one, especially dealing with income sharing agreements and the potential to make that happen in Virginia.
Thank you. Question goes to you, Ms. Tran.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anu. So my top 3 priorities, the first would be to make sure that we're increasing the state investment into our public school system so that we are able to attract and retain the best teachers and reduce classroom size. I mentioned before, I have 4 kids, 2 of whom are in elementary school, and I'm the president of my PTA, so that is continually going to be a top priority for me and also for the constituents in the 42nd District. My second priority is to making sure that we're going to expand access to high-quality, affordable health care. In Virginia, that means we need to expand Medicaid. There's absolutely no reason why we should not be doing that in this legislative session that's coming up. There are 400,000 working Virginians who would benefit from the expansion of Medicaid. The third priority is to making sure that we're supporting veterans as they transition from the military to the civilian workforce, either through entrepreneurship programs or increasing bridge programs so they can take advantage of their experience in the military. And I've had extensive experience working to support veterans and military spouses at the Department of Labor, and I want to take that expertise and help work on those types of programs as well.
Thank you. Question goes to you, Ms. Mancheno-Smoak.
As a college professor, engineer, and business owner, my primary areas of concern are going to be focused on ensuring that we lower our taxes so that we can have a catalyst for business growth in our state, and also grow our economy geographically so that there is more diversification of businesses, industries coming into our state, so that we diversify the portfolio away from dependency on just service industries and get into production industries that contribute more to the revenue of the state. And the other thing is to improve our infrastructure so that we can ensure that we grow businesses geographically throughout the entire state. And another thing is focusing on the education funding so that we get recognition here in Northern Virginia for our high cost of living and get monies into the classroom for our teachers because they know how to teach and know what to do with our students.
Thank you. Mr. Simon.
Thank you. So, my 3 priorities are first, giving folks an opportunity to succeed and improve their lives. And the way we do that is by helping them tackle the student loan debt problem so it doesn't burden them forever, and raising wages so people can earn a living wage for a full day's work. Number 2 would be giving people a government that they can trust and believe in. I think a lot of our problems we have today are because people do not trust the process by which their leaders are elected and the process by which bills pass. And then finally, it would be equal justice for all. For somebody like me, it's really tough to watch what we just saw in Charlottesville and people marching around saying Jews will not replace us, and blood and soil, and how we thrive in an environment like that is something that we really need to take a serious look at. So those are the 3 priorities. I think we all have talked about improving the economy and giving people a chance to succeed. I think it's great we have this idea that we can lower taxes and spend more money on infrastructure and education at the same time. I'm not sure how that math adds up. But if we want to attract businesses, we want to make sure that we are a state that welcomes everyone. And that means we don't have laws that discriminate against people based on their race, based on their religion, or based on their sexual orientation or gender identity.
Thank you. Mr. Casey.
Thank you. So my top 3 priorities would be first, as I mentioned, reforming our electoral system with campaign finance restrictions, both on what money can come in, restricting it from corporations and from PACs, and on what you can spend that money on. Implementing ranked choice voting system to allow independents and third-party candidates to have a fighting shot, and implementing a nonpartisan districting process. I also think we need to focus on transportation, and for that I believe that we need mass transit solutions, both public transit. I think that using VRE lines to expand out to the western parts of Northern Virginia would give us more control and would make more sense than expanding Metro. And I believe we could also find a lot of value in investigating private mass transit solutions. And additionally, our healthcare system in this country is pretty broken. Costs keep going up, and people are still not getting covered. And we're doing a reasonable job of trying to regulate. But I think we can take a hard look at reforming the whole system, starting with implementing a publicly provided baseline healthcare system. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is for Mr. Bulova, starting with Mr. Bulova actually. Do you support dedicated funding for Metro? And if so, how would you provide this funding?
Thank you. That's a great question. And yes, I do support a dedicated source of funding for Metro. I think it's important that they be able to rely on a funding stream. I don't think that necessarily has to come from a new tax. I think that means that we need to identify that out of the general fund and make sure that that's set aside based on the needs of the Metro system. I think Governor McAuliffe and Governor Hogan are pretty much on the same page with respect to the fact that we also don't want to write a blank check to Metro and it not to be used effectively and efficiently. And so certainly Metro is going to need funding in order to be able to get themselves out of the situation they're in. And so they need that upfront support now, but it needs to come with measures and metrics to ensure that that money is being spent wisely and that we're getting the bang for the buck that we need for Metro. But absolutely, we need to go ahead and fund that. My understanding is that's one of the governor's priorities that he's going to include in the budget this year.
Thank you. There's a recent study that shows that the Washington area is one of the 4th ranked worst traffic spots in the nation, right? So we absolutely need to make sure that we're addressing our congestion here in Northern Virginia, and Metro is a key part of that solution. Secretary Ray LaHood is completing a study in terms of the governance and funding for Metro, and what we need to do is make sure that we maintain flexibility in how Virginia funds Metro. I do support dedicated funding for Metro. It's really important that Metro is safe and reliable and earns the trust of people to go and use the system again so that we're able to take more cars off the road, have a healthier environment, reduce congestion. And I look forward to kind of the final study findings from the Secretary's study in terms of what he thinks our good options are here in Northern Virginia. Thanks.
I absolutely support their funding, dedicated funding to Metro, but I think we need to also recognize that there are problems beyond just funding. And one of the fundamental things that we need to consider when we're investing hard-earned tax dollars and making investments is that we establish accountability of the organization's leadership. When we don't have accountability and performance metrics in organizations, they fail. They fail in preventative measures. They fail in maintenance. They fail overall in program administration and operations. We as citizens cannot afford to have our tax dollars misspent and to put ourselves at risk because of failures in safety recommendations and quality control. So, if we're going to invest, let's make sure there is a performance management system put in place with accountability.
Yeah, I think we all agree. I will associate myself with David Bulova's comments on this, as I often do. I think we all agree that there ought to be a dedicated funding source, and it's just a line item in the budget, so that Metro knows that they can count on that money every year. They don't have to come begging for it, and they're not certain they can start to do the long-range planning that an organization like that needs to do. And I think we all agree that, again, it doesn't come as a blank check. It comes with accountability, and that's going to be key as well. And that's why I think it was great that the governor stepped up and on our dime, had Ray LaHood go ahead and start a management study and begin to look at some of the management issues that are plaguing Metro. I think we should continue that kind of an effort.
Okay, so I think that investing in Metro is it's a good investment. It's good for the environment. It's good for traffic. We certainly have a high enough density in this area to warrant a mass transit system. And in terms of accountability, certainly Metro has had a lot of issues over the years. I think Wiedefeld is doing a pretty good job nowadays. And I do think, there's a difference between a dedicated funding source and dedicated funding levy. And a lot of people, when they talk about dedicated funding, they're talking about having a gas tax or a portion of the sales tax that's just going towards Metro funding or public transit funding. And I'm a little hesitant to support that because there's a lot of instances where we see that. And one of the most infamous ones is school funding through lotteries. And what we've seen in states that fund the schools partially through the lotteries, it's a great PR thing. But what we've seen is there's an initial boost of funding in like the first couple of years after, and then the funding slowly drops off because people are expecting the lottery to be funding the system. So I support a dedicated funding source, but not a dedicated funding levy. Thank you.
Mr. Keam.
Sure, thank you for the question. Of all the members in not only in the Virginia State House, but also in Maryland and the Washington, D.C.'s council, I represent more metro stations than anybody else. I have 4 on the Silver Line and 2 on the Orange Line. And so obviously metro funding and metro sustainability and accountability and reform are very important to me. I would agree that we need dedicated funding, but I also agree that there's no reason why that has to translate to taxes, which a lot of our friends on the other side of the aisle tend to attack us as Democrats for saying anytime we say funding, they just equate that means more taxes. I absolutely do not agree with that. I think the way you make something dedicated as a source of revenue for a project is to prioritize what we already have. As you might remember, in 2013, we raised taxes in Northern Virginia, specifically for Northern Virginia transportation, which did not include Metro. And so the idea is using that fund as well as other funds that are already available, if you can prioritize to say, whenever we have funding that comes from DC, Maryland, and from the federal government as counterparts, we have to make sure that we live up to our fair share. Otherwise, we don't get that subsidized funding from the other jurisdictions. So by having that the top priority, so nothing else gets spent until we spend down the $500 million that we need in Virginia to pay for Metro, that's where I would have that dedicated.
Thank you. Our next question, we'll start with Ms. Tran. The question is, do you support the expansion of Medicaid? Why or why not?
Thank you. Absolutely. I believe that having high-quality, affordable health care is a right. And expanding Medicaid would ensure that 400,000 vulnerable working Virginians have access to health care. It's also, there's also a very strong economic argument to be made. Virginia has left $10.6 billion on the table because we have not expanded Medicaid. That's $6.6 million of our taxpayers' dollars every single day. So there's a very strong moral argument and a very strong economic argument for us to expand Medicaid. Thank you.
Medicaid was created to ensure that we protect children, the disabled, and elders in our community. That was the purpose, and those that are impacted by low income. That was the overall purpose of Medicaid. It needs to continue to be that purpose. For us to expand Medicaid to incorporate people that are 138% above the minimum wage is no longer the initial mission of Medicaid. We need to reform healthcare. That is the true answer. And all those cities that have in fact incorporated Medicare expansion are now in the red. We in Virginia have been very fortunate and very wise. We want to ensure the safety and health care of all people, and we need to ensure that we eliminate the middleman and let the states manage it.
So, just so sort of an instant fact check here. It's 138% of the poverty level that would qualify for Medicaid expansion. I don't think somebody making the minimum wage even gets quite close to that these days, which is another issue for another question. And it is a moral imperative that we provide health care coverage to those 400,000 people that aren't covered. I've been accused in the press and by my opponent of being a bit of a pain in the butt down in Richmond and a little bit antagonistic. And let me tell you what they mean by that. That's because I got up during the morning hour when we're supposed to be doing nice little speeches about how everything's great and talking about folks back home, and I point out the 4 people in the gallery that don't have Medicare coverage. I describe their stories of what happens to them as a result of the fact that they aren't covered because they fall in the coverage gap. They make too much money to qualify for traditional Medicaid, not enough money to be able to afford a subsidy on the exchange. They were, by design, this 138%, this gap was supposed to be filled by states opting into Medicaid. We've chosen very cruelly here in Virginia not to do that because we didn't like the president that passed the program. We wanted the program to fail, and as a result, I point out what that does to real Virginians every day. So if that's being a pain in the butt, that's being an antagonist, I'm going to keep doing it when I get down there next year.
So I believe that expanding Medicaid under the ACA guidelines absolutely makes sense. I think that certainly with the federal money on the table, it's a no-brainer. But even without that, I would support it. There's a lot of people who need good health care. But I only support it under the current paradigm that we have of a centralized insurance-driven healthcare service, which has a lot of flaws. The primary flaw is that nobody in the decision-making process has any incentive to control costs. And that's part of why the costs keep jumping up. So personally, while I would support the Medicaid expansion under that current paradigm, I believe we need to move towards a system of providing a baseline level of healthcare service and then open up the power of the free market for everything on top of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Keam?
Sure. Thank you. There are very few things I agree with Vice President Mike Pence, but one of the things I agree with him was when he was governor of Indiana, he expanded Medicaid for Indiana. That means that he and his constituents, when he was governor, are receiving your taxpayer dollars every single day. You and I are spending our money through the federal government to Indiana. John Kasich, when he was governor of Ohio, also expanded Medicaid. So your funds, your money is paying for John Kasich's Ohioans, just like we are paying for Indiana's. West Virginia, among other states, many other states that are conservative, Republican-led states have expanded Medicaid. But beyond that, let's put it this way. Affordable Care Act by the Supreme Court and now by the inaction of U.S. Senate and U.S. Congress and President Trump's administration is and will be the law of the land for the foreseeable future. Medicaid expansion is still on the table as the only option that we have in Virginia to help our most vulnerable citizens. So let's get our heads out of the sand and understand and recognize the law of the land has that and requires that we spend our money on our own taxpayers and not on some other states.
So I'll try to wrap it up a little bit because I think there's been some great points. I absolutely support expansion of Medicaid in Virginia, and here's a couple reasons why. Number one, if we don't have that expansion, we are already paying because of higher premiums to those who do not have insurance. So the idea that somehow we're not paying one way or the other, that's false. The second one is we are paying those federal taxes, just like Mark Keam went ahead and said. I would much rather be able to get that money back to Virginia rather than sending it off to other states or leaving it at the federal level. But I think the two things that are really important are, number one, preventative health means that you're going to save money in the long term. If you can keep somebody from suffering from a chronic illness and get them the health care that they need, that's going to save a lot of money in the long term. It's the right thing to do. And finally, no family should ever have to decide between bankruptcy and getting the health care that they need. Let's go ahead and make sure that we get those people covered.
Thank you. Our next question, we'll start with you, Ms. Tran. Oh, you did, sorry. Ms. Mancheno-Smoak. Should dreamers who graduate from high school be allowed to attend Virginia colleges with resident status?
I've worked with a lot of dreamers. They are the fabric of our future in this nation. These are young men and women that have done sacrificial endeavors just to complete an education here in Virginia, in the United States. I believe that we should have the opportunity to enable these residents at this point of our state to have the opportunity to attend Virginia colleges. These folks will be expanding our workforce of tomorrow. They are, in fact, the ones that will be working in our companies and leading our nation. They're high in number and they're high in caliber. They are part of us now, and we need to treat them as such.
Yes, yeah, I support what we call the DREAM Act, the Virginia DREAM Act. We haven't been able to get it passed in the Virginia General Assembly, but Attorney General Herring came to the realization when he was elected Attorney General that these folks are actually legally present here. They're legal residents, and under our statute, if you are a Virginia resident, you're here legally as a resident, you qualify for in-state tuition. So we don't need a Virginia DREAM Act. In fact, DACA status students are, in fact, now able to attend Virginia colleges as in-state tuition, as in-state students. And I think that's the way it should remain.
Yes, these people are our neighbors. They're part of our community, and everybody else who's our neighbor and a part of our community, we pay for their education, and I think that we should absolutely continue to do that for all people that fit that category. In addition, when it comes to that in-state status, I think something that's worth investigating is providing free community colleges for everybody who's in-state. I think it might possibly be a little bit too expensive to do that for universities and colleges, but for community colleges, I think providing technical education and some amount of science and math education at a higher level to all residents and citizens and anybody here is very positive and will pay dividends for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to remind the audience to please not applaud after every candidate.
Just after me.
Right before I speak, right? Well, on the DREAM Act, if I had more time, I'll tell you a great story about how it all originated. I was in 2001, early part of 2001, I was a staffer in the Senate Judiciary Committee for a Democratic senator who came up with the idea of the DREAM Act because of a Korean American student in Chicago who was suffering from a lack of documentation when she was applying for college. When we broached the idea, a senator from Utah, Republican, who happened to be the chairman, Orrin Hatch, loved the idea. He came up with the name DREAM Act, which stands for Developing Resources for an Education for Alien Minors, DREAM Act. So it was a Republican idea that came up. And it wouldn't have passed but for the fact that comprehensive immigration reform kind of jettisoned it. I think not only do we have to support it, but there are two parts to it. And first is the in-state tuition, which Virginia already has. We have to make sure that we provide that opportunity for the kids to stay. But the second part of it is what happens after you give them that legal status? What happens once they start working under the DACA program? Can they become U.S. citizens eventually and stay in this country, or will they always live with the fear that they have to get kicked out and live somewhere else? I think we have to do both parts, provide the financial and other incentives for them to stay so they can become employees here, and also give them a legal status so that they can stay here and then have families themselves.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I think I agree with everybody here. The day that President Trump made the announcement about repealing DACA, I actually went to George Mason University that day, and there was a group of dreamers who had organized a forum, and I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but there was at least 200 people there, and it wasn't just dreamers, but it was students, it was teachers and faculty, it was members of the community who were all very, very concerned. And I looked across the room, and I guess what really struck me was just the enormous amount of potential that I saw in those students right there. And they're absolutely correct. You know, these are students who have grown up in our community. We've invested in them, and we really do owe it to them to help them to succeed. And so we definitely need to make sure that we support those dreamers coming forward.
Thanks, David. Absolutely, we need to be continuing our current policy of allowing dreamers to have in-state tuition if they also meet the Virginia eligibility requirements. You know, dreamers are striving young Americans, right, for whom this is their only home. This is the only home they know. Right? They worship with us, they go to school with us, they cheer on our sports teams, they are our friends and colleagues. And we need to make sure that they also have these amazing career opportunities and pathways as they go through and earn degrees and develop their skills. And I would also pledge to work with our congressional delegation to make sure that we're supporting comprehensive efforts for comprehensive immigration reform. I worked in immigration advocacy for an organization that worked both with the left and the right to lift up very diverse voices to support immigrants and immigration reform. And we need to continue to support what we can do to enable Dreamers to thrive here in Virginia, as well as federally working with our congressional delegation. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. The next question is for you, Mr. Simon. What laws would you support to ensure gun safety in Virginia? Would you do away with the gun show loophole?
I'm happy to lead off with this question. So the list is pretty long. I would start off with, yes, universal background checks for every transfer of a firearm is essential. We want to make sure that we keep dangerous weapons out of the hands of dangerous people. That's what it's about. Nobody's talking about taking away everybody's gun. Nobody's talking about banning them or gathering them up or registering anything. But we want to make sure that dangerous weapons stay out of the hands of dangerous people, people that have a history of domestic violence, people that have been convicted of felonies, people that are dangerously mentally ill and have been committed, have no business having firearms. I also would support a ban on long guns and rifles being carried around in urban areas during protests. You all saw again what happened in Charlottesville. The idea that somebody can show up in paramilitary dress and shields carrying around a semi-automatic weapon is ridiculous. That ought not be allowed to happen. And we have an active shooter situation like we had in Maryfield was it yesterday? Right? You don't want a bunch of cowboys coming out with their private weapons roaming the streets looking for the shooter and having the police have no idea who the good guys with the gun and who the bad guys with the gun might be. So those are some of the things I would start with.
I agree that we need to try to keep firearms out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them, of dangerous people, of convicted felons. And I would add as an addition that we need to make it as easy as possible for people who should be able to own a firearm to obtain one, because it is a right. And with that in mind, I would support requiring a permit to purchase a firearm in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we can restrict that permit to residents only, and as a part of that, you'll have to go through a background check. You'll have to be in good standing with the Commonwealth. And that would both make it easier, it would make the process faster for people who are approved, and it would make it more difficult for people who should not obtain firearms. Thank you very much.
Any conversation about firearms, it becomes very difficult for everybody because everybody in America knows somebody who was either harmed by or a victim of a firearm. Whatever the cause is, the fact, I think we can all agree, whether you're on the conservative side or the liberal side, I think we can all agree that we do have a lot more firearms in America per capita than any other country in the world, and that does have a correlation to the number of crimes and incidents that have occurred. Last night, the gentleman who used a firearm in Maryfield turned the gun on himself and committed suicide. He happens to be a constituent of mine. He happens to be somebody that myself and our state senator were trying to help because he was going through a family situation. We didn't realize that he was at such a brink of depression that he decided to do what he did. And so our heart goes to his family and survivors. But there's one thing that we can do that brings both sides together on this issue, which is to make sure that whoever wants to purchase a firearm under the Second Amendment to be able to use it for his or her lawful purposes goes in front of every government agency they need to go to make sure that we've checked every box so that nobody who does not qualify mentally, criminally, or otherwise ends up purchasing a firearm.
Thank you. And so I've got a great deal of respect for the Second Amendment. My dad made it a very, very point to make sure that I knew how to handle a firearm when I was growing up, and I've made sure to pass that along to my two children, because I think that really is at the heart of gun safety, is knowing what you have and how to handle it if you ever run into it. The simple fact is, though, is Marcus is correct, is this is all about gun safety. It's all about making sure we keep guns out of the hands of those who most of us would agree should not have them in the first place. And so closing things like the gun show loophole are absolutely priorities. But I will say, and I think Mark's story is a really, really poignant one. is that the other thing that we need to do is we need to invest more in mental health. A lot of the individuals who take up weapons are doing it because they don't know what else to do, because they are having mental health issues. And so Virginia, we've been trying to invest more in those particular areas. We have a habit of investing after tragedies and then ratcheting back. We need to make sure that we're increasing funding so people who need to get that help can get that help.
Thanks, David. As a mom, I really worry about the safety of my kids. When I hear about them practicing a lockdown at their elementary school, in my mind, it's like, how do I have this conversation with them? What that's really about? That's really not about a potential bear in West Springfield entering their school. It's what they think it's about, So for me, it's a very personal issue, and I do support making sure that we have common sense solutions to gun violence. And I really want to applaud the two women here from Moms Demand Action for making sure that, three, that we're continuing to press this issue every single day and bringing it up to the forefront of our very, busy political conversations that we have, that this is a really important conversation. But universal background checks, the reinstatement of the successful one gun, 1 month policy. In addition to mental health services, we also need to continue, for example, to ensure the safety of domestic violence survivors, right? And making sure that we're protecting them as they are in their most vulnerable moments. So I think this is an issue that we need to continue to work together on across the aisle. Thanks.
I am a gun owner. I know how to use them. I respect this right that we have. I just want to share a personal story. There has been death in my family from using a gun on themselves. And I absolutely support that we need to all come together to recognize that folks that have mental illness, that folks that have backgrounds of criminal intent, we need to incorporate safety precautions and background checks so that these situations of family members using these weapons on themselves can at some point be avoided and protect the rest of our society. I find this a situation also that we need to ensure we don't lose this right, because it enables all families to protect their loved ones in their own home. And so, thank you for that.
Thank you. So the next question is, what would you propose to provide more affordable housing for our teachers and first responders, as well as seniors? Mr. Casey?
Thank you. When it comes to affordable housing up here in Fairfax County, we have a pretty aggressive affordable housing program, but I'll say that there are 4 levers that we can pull to help address this. One is with an affordable housing system to make sure that developers provide affordable housing units with every development they do. Another is increasing the wages of our public servants, particularly tied to the cost of living, so they can afford to live in the areas where they work. And another would be to improve our transportation network and lower the cost and time of a commute so that they can live further out, because at the end of the day, an urban area is going to be pretty expensive to live in, and there's only so much that you can do about that. So I believe that increasing the wages of our teachers and public servants and improving our public transportation systems are the best moves that we can make in terms of making sure that people can afford to live in the areas that they serve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Affordable housing and just lack of housing across the country is a major, major problem, not only in Northern Virginia, where we have population growth, but across the country. I was just in California for a conference recently, talking to some of my friends who happen to work in the housing industry, real estate, and they tell me that there are about 3.6 million housing units short in California. And across the country, you have roughly 600,000 new homes that are built. That means that even if every single house in the world, in America, is built and sent to California, they're not going to keep up with the growth there. And so if you extrapolate that across all of Virginia, you're going to have the same problem. I think one of the ways to deal with it is to ensure that as we have these new developments, we try our best to provide smart housing. So instead of having these houses that take up 1 acre, 2 acres at a time, if there's a way that we can create a community. A lot of our families are now starting to live age in place, where instead of looking for a place to move out and then sell that house to another family, they want to stay in place. So a lot of Asian cultures, we like to have multi-families come together in one family so they can take care of each other. So if there's a smarter way to use the property that we have, that'll help with the inventory. And of course, at the county level and the state level, we certainly can use more funding for housing programs. Like the county has a great penny fund program, which just works, but other counties can adopt something like that.
Thank you very much. And affordable housing is a very critical issue in this area. From an economic standpoint, we want to make sure that our teachers, our police, our civil servants are able to live where they work, and also a transportation issue. If they can't live here, they have to commute longer distances. In the General Assembly, we've been doing a couple things. With Virginia Housing Trust Fund, we finally were able to capitalize that, which has made a huge difference, particularly with effectively ending homelessness among veterans. A couple years ago, I was able to pass a piece of legislation to give the city of Fairfax additional authority in order to negotiate with the developers to get affordable housing, and they're in the process of putting that ordinance together now, and I'm very proud of our city council for doing that. Two other things, though, that I wanted to touch on. Number one is making sure that senior citizens can continue to live in their homes. And so tax credits in order for them to retrofit are very important, and also weatherization programs are critical. You can really make a house much more affordable if you can weatherize and keep the energy costs down, and that's something that we need to continue to focus on.
Thank you. So if you don't have stable housing, it makes it very difficult to learn if you're young, or go to work if you're older, right? And most effectively, right? So having stable housing is such a critical part of our daily lives and kind of the assurance that we're going to be okay. So we absolutely here in Fairfax County need to make sure that we're addressing affordable housing issues. I spoke to a constituent who said that, you know, his daughter is a teacher in Fairfax County, and she actually had to move out because she couldn't afford to live here anymore. And now lives in like Loudoun County and commutes back here to teach. So we need to make sure that we are fully funding our schools and increasing our teacher pay, as well as pay for other civil servants such as law enforcement. We also need to make sure that we are funding the Housing Trust Fund. And I'd be open to a conversation around making sure that there's some dedicated funding for that fund. It helps to incentivize the building of affordable housing units when working with developers and such. And so really kind of exploring all those different options to making sure that we have as many affordable housing units as possible here in the county.
Absolutely support having private and commercial partnerships so that we actually leverage in the negotiations for housing expansions and commercial projects the concept of incentivizing units to be included in the development. One of the things that I also would want to do is ensure that we consider having housing for individuals that have disabilities so that they can actually have normal lives and be able to live in units that have a community of support for them. This is part of the issue of homelessness and ensuring that people can live independently in specific housing, in specific communities, and there needs to be an incentive for commercial developers to have skin in the game along with public-private partnerships.
Thank you. I'm a real estate attorney by trade. That's what I do as my day job, and so I'm all about making deals. And I think we want to give I agree with Delegate Bulova said, we need to give localities the authority to make deals with real estate developers. And so typically what they want is more density. And in exchange for giving them that extra density, you want to have the opportunity to have them set aside more affordable workforce housing. And then I think probably a marketing campaign to go with that too. I have a lot of clients that say, oh, I'm ready to buy this townhouse, but I've heard that the house next door is one of these affordable units. What does that mean? Well, that means you're probably going to have a firefighter or a police officer or a school teacher living next door to you. How does that sound? That sounds pretty cool, right? But that's not the image that people have of affordable housing. So I think something to market it, let's make deals with the deal makers. And then finally, what I'd say about the affordable housing issue is, we heard earlier about this 80 cents on the dollar goes to other parts of the state. Well, part of the reason we have 80 cents on the dollar go to other parts of the state, you don't want to move the state workforce to Fairfax County. Trust me, we'd have to pay them a lot more. And it wouldn't really be very cost effective on the one hand. On the other hand, one of the things we spend our money on are prisons. We don't want any state prisons, and that would solve the affordable housing problem if we plopped a state prison right in the middle of Burke. But I don't think we want to go there either.
Thank you so much. Our next question is, Mr. Keam, we'll start with you. Sure. What is your position on climate change and its relationship to the recent hurricanes?
Well, let me start by a disclaimer that I am not a scientist, unless you consider political science a science, and I don't know enough about the science, but I do know one thing, that if we don't do something about what we perceive to be climate change now, things can only get worse. And the reason I say that is because I do believe that man has a role in causing a lot of the climate changes that we've seen, as well as some of the other effects that create that pollution. So I do think that this is beyond an argument from the left, from the right, from conservatives, liberals. This is about us as business people and as members of society. How do we deal with this in a smart way? One thing that I do, I'm on the House Commerce and Commerce Committee where we deal with a lot of energy issues. One thing that we have to do is go beyond the traditional talking points, where you have Dominion Power on one side saying, we have fossil fuel and electricity and coal, and that is all we have, and that's all we're going to offer you. Then the other side saying, let's use all this clean, renewable energy. We need to be able to come together, and I've been able to work across the aisle in creating a working group to bring solar for the first time in Virginia. And I'm hoping that that kind of good faith, goodwill opportunity will create more opportunities so that we can overcome not only climate change, but cheaper energy for everybody.
Thank you, Mark. And yeah, climate change is absolutely real, and it has huge implications for Virginia. I had the pleasure of serving Governor Kane's Climate Change Commission a couple of years ago, and looking at the potential impacts, whether that is vector-borne diseases, whether it's on our agriculture, whether it's on the Port of Hampton roads, and the billions of dollars that we need to protect our port, which is one of the most vulnerable in the nation. Virginia has a lot to lose if we don't step up to the plate. Now, the thing is that we have an opportunity here to take a hold of an economic boom that's associated with clean energy. And so whether you're investing in solar, whether you're investing in offshore wind, we can get out in front of that. We can take advantage of that. We can go ahead and build those things here in Virginia, or we can lag behind, and we're going to lead the pack, and we're going to have to suffer the consequences of climate change without any of the economic benefits. I'd rather see Virginia lead the pack.
Thank you. In the 42nd District, we have Mason-Neck State Park amongst our many treasures. So if we're not fighting climate change, we're not going to have those treasures like Mason-Neck or others in our state anymore. Absolutely, I believe that climate change is real, and we need to be at the forefront of battling it. Doing so is not just good for the environment, it's also good for our health, and it can help grow the economy. I think we need to be looking at how do we invest and nurture our clean energy industries, such as wind and solar. I had a chance to work when I was at the Department of Labor to work with the state of Montana in helping to jumpstart their biofuels industry in a very red state, where we were able to bring together growers and economic developers and the community and technical colleges and the workforce side to look at how do we support entrepreneurs, how do we support innovators, and how do we grow that workforce to meet the needs. So I think that's what we need to be doing here in Virginia so that we can be taking the lead. We don't want Maryland and North Carolina to be surpassing us in this area. We want to be the leaders. Thanks.
Having worked in the energy industry, I'm very much supportive of alternative sources of energy. We need to be leveraging multiple vectors along that line. It is no longer just a dependency on fossil fuels. We have the technology today to actually store energy and make it mobile. So we don't even have to build power plants anymore. That's the nature of technology in today's energy industry. And with respect to climate change, we live in a planet that is alive, that moves, that has tectonic plates that are going to change all the time. We need to accept this is the world we live in. We need to protect it. And so environmental controls and understanding how to have sustainable practices in our industries is vital to the continuity and cleanliness of this planet. That is something we have to just incorporate.
So climate change is clearly happening. There's no denying it. It's having effects on us, and we caused it. I mean, that's the bottom line. I don't need to be a scientist, I don't think, to reach that conclusion. I agree with the scientists who tell us that. I think that their science is sound, and we can see the effects every day. lately we've been seeing a lot of it. It's funny, in Virginia, we're not allowed in the General Assembly, you're a troublemaker if you call it climate change. We have to call it persistent recurrent flooding, which we know happens. And we can deal with persistent recurrent flooding, but we can't call it climate change. We can't do anything about the Clean Power Plan. In Virginia, we refused to participate in the EPA's Clean Power Plan to try and, again, incentivize the use of renewable energies and end our dependence on fossil fuels. And it is problematic when you've got big corporate giants like Dominion who've got a big sunk investment in coal-burning power plants. They don't want to retire those early because they don't get the return on investment that they expected. But I think it's our job as legislators to push them in that direction and get us moving on renewables as quickly as we can and have renewable portfolio standards and do the things we can do, pull the levers we can pull as lawmakers to make the transition.
So this year it hit 108 degrees in San Francisco, which most years it doesn't get above 85. Last year, Christmas was warmer than the 4th of July here, and it was snowing in the Sahara Desert. So something is happening. Something is happening to our environment, and the smartest scientists we have who are investigating this tell us that it's because of a greenhouse effect. It's because of human consumption and human burning of fossil fuels. And now another thing I want to say is that the Apollo project is oftentimes held up. Going to the moon is oftentimes held up as one of the greatest human achievements. And part of why is that there's almost nothing bad about it. It's just a dream, and it's something where we took weapons of war and we did something great with it, something where we all came together and did something amazing. And I think there's an opportunity to do that here. There's an opportunity for a massive project to invest in nuclear power, and solar power, and wind power, and to scale back our consumption while maintaining the growth we need for a strong economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is for Mr. Bulova. Can't read without them. Several bills recommending methods for redistricting reform were proposed in 2016, but were tabled in committee. How can we get bills like this out of committee? Would you support a bill requiring a switch to non-partisan or bipartisan redistricting?
Yes, and very strongly. I think when you look at a lot of the problems we're having at the federal level and the issues that we are trying hard to avoid in Virginia with respect to partisan gridlock really come down to our broken system of redistricting. And so what we have is very strong Republican districts, very strong Democratic districts, and very few where an election in November is going to be meaningful. And I think that's been deleterious to our entire democratic process and our entire democratic system. And fixing that will go a long way. The problem is asking one side or the other to give up the power of redistricting is very, very tough. And so how do we do this? Well, it really comes down to great organizations like League of Women Voters, like One Virginia 2021, that reach out to members, delegates, and senators who either haven't taken a position or have voted against these measures, and let them know that you're going to base your vote on that. If they don't think that you're going to base your vote on it, they're not going to change. But I think it's the right thing to do for Virginia, and I hope everybody would contact their legislators.
I think this is an excellent question, and one of the most important ones that we're facing in terms of what's at stake in this election this year, with the census coming out and the lines to be redrawn. What's key to our democracy is making sure that every single one of our voices is being heard in our government, it's being represented. And when you have district lines that are drawn to benefit one party or one person, that doesn't happen. So I fully support having an independent, nonpartisan commission assess and redraw our district lines. But we can't stop there in terms of making sure that every voice is heard in our democracy. We need to also be tackling campaign finance reform and making sure that we reduce barriers to voting. So all of that together will get us, I think, the end goal of what this question is really focused on is how do we make sure that our voices are heard in our democracy. Thanks.
We've all experienced the impact of redistricting, and today we actually have the technology. There is technology. There are ways and methodologies to incorporate nonpartisan, objective ways of redistricting an area. And why aren't we using it is really the question. Why are we continuing to focus just on party lines? We should be representing all of the people, and folks should be running to represent whoever is geographically positioned. However, if we don't use the tools that we have at our disposal today, we're then refusing to do anything about it.
So I'm going to maybe take a little bit different tack on that. I think that the technology is the problem that's gotten us here. The real problem with redistricting that we have right now is the tools have gotten so precise and so effective that the politicians are able to use them in the 2010 census to draw very precise districts to achieve exactly what they want to do. And so I think what we need to do is, I think because the tools have gotten so accurate and so effective at political gerrymandering, we need to take that tool away from the politicians, and we need to put it in a nonpartisan redistricting commission. The second part of the question was, how do you get it out of committee? How do you stop doing that? So I'll tell you again, it's sort of a theme here. You get labeled a troublemaker, like me, when you start to use the rules to get floor votes on things like this. And so I was able to get a floor vote on the minimum wage, for instance, something the Republicans really didn't want to have to go on the record doing. There are rules and tricks and things that you can do to put folks on the record about this, because as David said, you can't really hold people accountable for their vote on redistricting if they never have to vote on it, if it's only the 7 or 8 people in the subcommittee that vote on it. So we can do things to make sure that they're held accountable for it.
Well, if I get elected, I think I'll be the only independent in the General Assembly, so I'd be happy to take care of redistricting, and then I'll be independent and nonpartisan. No, I support creating a commission independent of the legislature with members that are appointed by the governor and approved by the legislature to handle our redistricting process. There's no way to fully take the politics out of any system, but we can at least make a solid step forward. Another thing that I would say that several other states with independent commissions have implemented is to, after the redistricting is done, to put it up for a popular vote the same way we do for bond referendums. I think that is an important step that we should do in our redistricting process to ensure that people have faith in the lines, which is what gives them faith in the elections. Thank you.
The simple answer to whether I prefer a nonpartisan, independent, non-political process versus the current system that we have is absolutely I do. And you've heard this over and over from many people that democracy is a system where the voters should pick people like us, not the other way around. And right now the system works where it's not just all of us, it's the majority party in the House decides that they want to stay in power. So they figure out exactly where all of us live. They draw a circle around their homes and say, okay, well, we want these guys to never challenge a Republican and vice versa. So they draw lines around us so that we get stuck in one political office district and they have another one. So that's how we end up with the results that we have. And the outcome of that is that rather than fearing going back and talking to voters and saying, hey, how am I doing? They only fear, if you're a Republican, the Republican primary. Or if you're a Democrat, a Democratic primary. Meaning that both sides constantly go to the extremes so that they get, they don't get challenged by somebody who's further conservative or the liberal. As a result, there's no middle ground in Virginia politics or in American politics anymore. And that has to break. And so I would support any way to break that gerrymandering process.
This is our last question, and we'll start with Ms. Tran. What is your position regarding term limits for members of Virginia legislature?
Sorry, as I go into a coughing fit. Thank you. I think this is a really interesting question. I'm a first-time candidate, and I do believe that we need to have some term limits. I'm open to having that conversation, absolutely. Because what we need to do is make sure that our government continues to represent us, that we're breaking down barriers for people to run for office and to get elected and to be a voice for the community. If elected, I'd be the first Asian American woman elected to the Virginia state government. I can't believe we haven't reached that milestone yet. I'm excited about this opportunity, but that's a testament to the barriers it takes to run for office. And so I think by having term limits, we're going to be able to open the doors and nourish a new kind of bench of leaders in our communities to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. Thank you. Sorry.
I absolutely support term limits. I am the first multicultural, racial, multilingual candidate to be nominated by the Republican Party. And one of the things is that what we have created in the United States with these long terms is basically a ruling class. One of the things that many immigrants have been coming to this country to get away from. I'm even running for a position that's been held by one person for 24 years. The President of the United States can only do 2 terms, 2 4-year terms. Why should others get more than that?
So in Virginia, the governor is term limited to just 1 term, and it's part of our system of checks and balances. The legislators are the institutional memory. We're part-time, so we're only down there 60 or 45 days a year. It's hard enough to learn what goes on in 45 days. By the time you kind of figure it out, I'm now through my 4th term, I'm still trying to figure it out. So I'm going to maybe surprise some of you, but I'm completely against term limits. I support a lot of the other reforms we talked about, so that if somebody's there too long and they're not responsive, we have a realistic opportunity to vote them out. I think term limits are the easy way out. You see, when people stick around too long, well, they stick around too long because they're in gerrymandered districts where they don't face real competition. They get all the incumbent finance that incumbents get, so there's not a real opportunity for people to raise money to kick them out. So we have all this incumbent protection stuff built into the system. That's the reason folks stick around longer than they need to. I think we need to solve those underlying problems, and then we don't need term limits. If we can actually have competitive races every 2 years or every 4 years, and then when somebody's been there too long, the voters can make the decision that it's time for them to go. That's a much better system. I think the term limits is sort of an easy way out.
Thank you. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Term limits are a reasonable idea, and what they're trying to accomplish is to reduce corruption and reduce the number of entrenched representatives, people who are entrenched because they have essentially the entire political system in their district built around them. And that's a real problem, but we got to make sure that when we're implementing a policy that we're accounting for unintended side effects. And I think that Delegate Simon is absolutely correct in that legislating is very complex and it's difficult and it requires skill and experience. And so if we are just kicking people out every 3 or 4 terms, then we're going to end up giving more power to people who don't have term limits, the staffers and the lobbyists in making policy decisions. So personally, I think a reasonable middle ground would be to implement a consecutive term limit. That is to say that representatives can only serve for somewhere between 3 and 5 terms, at which point they have to step down for at least a term, and then if they want to come back, they can fight for it. And that will ensure that only the best representatives are in there for a long period of time. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry about that.
I like the idea of term limits, I think all of us do, because you don't want to have these career politicians. The reality, though, the side effect and the unintended consequence of term limits is that you create actually more politicians and more candidates than you actually get rid of. And here's the reason why. I used California as an example earlier. I actually lived in California when I was younger, and I still have a lot of friends in California politics. The moment somebody runs and wins a seat in the California State Assembly or State Senate, you know what they're doing? They're running for Congress, they're running for assemblies, they're running for something else right away. The reason is there's term limits. You've had freshman members, somebody who just got elected, freshman members who became speakers of the House. And as soon as they became Speaker of the House, all they did was curry favors with others so that they can then run for something bigger than that. So you create an underlying class of politicians and political cottage industry that comes when you have term limits, because everybody knows that he or she's going to be running for something else. The best term limit is when you have other reforms, gerrymandering, tougher primary systems, tougher voter accountability, exactly what you're doing so that you know exactly what your member stands for. And if you don't like the way he or she votes, you should be voting them out. That should be the term limits. The voters should say how long they serve.
I think that Marcus and Mark summed that up very, very well. And there is a big difference between an executive where you got one, like our governor who's got enormous power, where it makes sense to have term limits versus 100 members of the House of Delegates, which is part-time. And so there really is a fear that if we are constantly cycling in new people, you don't develop that level of expertise. And you will start to see the special interests, you will start to see the lobbyists hold more and more sway down there. I think this is a symptom of a larger problem, and I 100% agree that if you can fix gerrymandering, if you can put in a system of nonpartisan redistricting reform, you right-size the system, and so you have competitive districts, and ultimately you empower the voters to be able to serve as that stopgap, and they can impose term limits if somebody isn't performing how they expect them to.
So that was our last question. I'll now call upon each candidate to give their closing remarks. You have about a minute each, and I'm going to start with Mr. Casey.
Thank you. Thank you all again for coming here tonight. I want to start with a quote. Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. John F. Kennedy said that in 1961 in the midst of an explosion of civic and democratic engagement. And we should remember and emphasize that spirit and those values. Winning an election is far less important to me than trying to get out 100% of the vote, than hearing what everybody has to say. People need to understand and be active in their government in order to believe in it, in order for democracy to work. And for that to happen, some things are going to have to change. And just like the world needed a shift from Copernicus to Kepler, and from Newton to Einstein, and from King George to President Washington, we need some new paradigms today. From elections and energy to healthcare and transportation, we could use some new thinking. We can do better than patching and tweaking broken ideas. That's why I'm running, and that's why I'm here today, and I hope that's why you're all here too. Thank you.
Are we ready? I'm sure you get my phone. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you to the league again, and thank you all for the great questions. I think this was actually a really interesting and provocative and very civil debate that we've had here, and I think that this is a great opportunity for all of us to do that. I look forward, I hope with your support, to going down for a third consecutive term in the House of Delegates, where I'm going to continue to fight for the things that I believe in. I'm going to continue to stand up and be a loud advocate for sensible gun violence prevention measures, for raising people's wages so that a full day's work pays a livable wage that you can live on, for helping students escape the debt cycle that comes with student loan debt so that they can succeed and move forward in their lives, and to make sure that Virginia is a place where everyone feels welcome to come and live and work and start a family, regardless of their race, regardless of their religion, regardless of who they love. Virginia is the greatest state, the greatest commonwealth, the greatest place to live. It's where I grew up. It's where I'm raising my family. But we have to work to keep it that way. It's not a given that it'll always be that way. But with your support, I hope to work to keep it the great place that it is.
As a professor, as a business owner, as an engineer, I am committed to work for District 42 and to be your voice and your fighter for what is needed by our community in Richmond. I will work hard to earn your trust and be worthy of your vote this November. That is my promise to the district and to you, and I thank you for sharing this evening with all of us and allowing us to have this dialogue with you. It has been an honor. Thank you very much.
So you might have seen my baby come in and out throughout the evening. Let me tell you a quick story about her. I was due with her on Inauguration Day. She's 8 months old. And after the election, my husband and I wanted to give her a name that reflected our values. So we named her Elise Mancheno. Elise was inspired by Ellis Island. Matt has family that passed through Ellis Island as they were searching for opportunity in America as they were escaping from anti-Semitism at the turn of the century. Mancheno is Vietnamese for bright bell, and that was inspired by the Liberty Bell. To us, her name means to ring the bells of liberty and champion opportunity for all. I made the decision to run when she was a month old because I had just given this very aspirational name to this tiny baby, and I knew that I couldn't just rest upon her shoulders that responsibility of creating this future for herself, that I needed to stand up in this moment and to fight for her future and for all the kids in my community. So I'd be really honored to have your vote if you live in the 42nd District, or to pass a good word on to your friends that do. Thank you so much for this opportunity tonight. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It has been a pleasure, and it's been a great conversation. I also want to thank the League of Women Voters and their partners for putting on this forum. I want to thank again, all of our new candidates for stepping up to the plate. That's really at the heart of our democracy, and I'm so glad that they've done that. I remember when I was a relatively new delegate, we had a Republican come in, a prominent Republican come in and speak to the House Democratic Caucus. And what he said has stuck with me for a long time, which is that we all come down there to represent our constituents. And when we can work together, we should work together. When we disagree, it's okay to fight for what you believe in, but you should do so respectfully. And so when I go down there, that's what I want to do. That's what I strive to do. I like to problem solve. I love to problem solve. But when you do disagree, you do it in a respectful way. We got so much stuff that we can get accomplished here in Virginia, and so many things that can propel Virginia forward. You've heard a lot about them tonight, but I just want to say one of the things that I've learned is the power of listening. If you live in my district, and I'll finish up in just 1 second, I've had coffee hours, informal coffee hours, for the last 12 years, where I just sit there and listen at Main Street Bagel. I got 2 more this fall. If you're one of my constituents, I hope you'll stop by. They're a wonderful time. Coffee is on me.
Well, first of all, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for your time, giving up a weeknight to come and listen to a bunch of candidates and political officials. But this tells you why America is such a great country. It always has been and remains that way. Because this is the only country in the world where you and I, as regular folks, just regular people, can decide your future and decide what your state government delivers for you. Your county and the federal level is the same way. We decide what's important. And through the process of democracy, through the process of voting, we choose among us, the majority, who our leaders are going to be. And if you don't like what he or she is doing, you have the power to change that person. And yet sometimes we feel so helpless. When you saw what happened in national government last year and what's going on every single day today, you get so helpless that one person can change the political dynamic and conversation with one tweet. Well, this is about you having that voice once again, you having a seat at the table so that you decide your future. People like the folks you see up here as first-time candidates or as incumbents, we're here to serve you because we care about the exact same things you care about. We live in your neighborhoods. We have kids that go to your schools here. We drive the same traffic. So what we want to do is make sure that your state, your taxpayer funding is delivering the services that you deserve and your priorities are being addressed at the state level and not the partisan stuff. So with that, I want to thank you for supporting me in the last 8 years. I ask for your vote once again on November 7th. And finally, I want to thank Anu for the great work that you've done as a moderator, League of Women Voters, American Association of University Women, the Voice of Vietnamese Americans, and all the other volunteers and other organizations for sponsoring us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So our Q&A session is now over, but you can meet with the candidates individually. We have a request. We have these forms here. Some of you may have them on your seats, and there are some in the back. Please fill them out and hand them in before you leave. Thank you, and don't forget to vote on November 7th. Your vote counts.
Are you videotape? Để em tắt cái này.